Arthur Pendleton hired a cleaning lady while his son and daughter-in-law were away on vacation. An hour later, she called in a panic. "Mr. Pendleton, someone is crying in the locked basement." "It's not the TV." The frail, 71-year-old man rushed over and pried open their dirty secret. Arthur lived in a quiet, historic suburb of Oak Park, Illinois. He had spent 40 years as a senior corporate auditor before retiring. He always believed you could spot a lie from a mile away if you just knew where to look. A misplaced decimal, a panicked transfer, a glamorous lifestyle that didn't quite add up on paper. 40 years of digging into records where things weren't what they seemed had taught him to always trust his meticulous, sharp instincts. But Arthur never thought he would need to use those instincts to audit his own son. The terrifying phone call from Marta had ended only minutes ago, but the dial tone still echoed in his quiet living room. Arthur dropped his reading glasses onto his mahogany desk and grabbed his car keys. His hands were spotted with age and usually prone to a slight tremor, but right now they gripped the metal with white-knuckled intensity. He did not bother grabbing his warm coat despite the crisp autumn air outside. He practically ran to his old sedan parked in the driveway. For a man who had lived his entire life adhering strictly to rules and protocols, the drive across Oak Park was a blur of reckless desperation. He ignored 2 stop signs and pushed his foot heavy on the accelerator. His mind raced much faster than the vehicle. Someone was crying in the basement. Marcus had explicitly told him that the basement was strictly off-limits, claiming it was undergoing toxic mold remediation. Chloe had even sent Arthur a lengthy text message filled with wellness buzzwords about airborne toxins and the absolute importance of sealing the area off completely while they were enjoying their luxury couples retreat in Sedona. It was a lie. Arthur knew the bitter taste of a lie the second it hit his tongue, and this one tasted like pure poison. He pulled aggressively into the wide paved driveway of his son's massive architectural monstrosity. The house was a towering testament to modern minimalism, consisting of sharp angles, cold concrete, and expansive glass windows that offered zero warmth. It was the perfect pristine backdrop for Chloe's social media empire, a sterile stage where she preached about authentic and organic living to her millions of devoted followers. Standing frozen on the immaculate front porch was Marta Silva. Marta was a hardworking woman whose taxes Arthur had prepared for free for over a decade. Right now she was clutching her plastic cleaning caddy so hard her knuckles were bone white. Her face was entirely drained of color. "Mr. Pendleton," Marta gasped as Arthur stumbled out of his car with his breath coming in short, harsh gasps. "I was dusting the hallway near the basement stairs. I heard a noise. A soft thumping. Then the crying. It sounds like a little animal, but it is human. I swear it is human." Arthur did not waste time with empty reassurances. He nodded once with his jaw set firmly. "Stay out here, Marta. Do not call anyone yet." He bypassed the heavy oak front door and moved directly toward the side entrance that led into the garage. He knew Marcus kept a pristine, obsessively organized tool wall in there. Marcus never actually used the tools because they were merely shiny props to make him feel masculine, but today they were exactly what Arthur needed. The garage smelled strongly of expensive car wax and chemical cleaners. Arthur scanned the neatly hanging metal implements and his sharp eyes locked onto a heavy, solid steel crowbar. He pulled it down. It was incredibly heavy, forcing his frail shoulders to slump slightly under the sudden weight, but a strange, terrifying surge of adrenaline pumped through his veins. He had survived a mild heart attack 3 years ago, and his doctor had explicitly told him to avoid severe stress. But the cold dread twisting in his stomach completely eclipsed any physical weakness. He entered the house through the interior garage door. The silence inside was thick and oppressive. The walls were painted a stark, blinding white. There was no clutter, no personal touches, no signs of a family actually living and loving there. It felt like a museum dedicated entirely to vanity. Arthur moved past the massive chef's kitchen, past the perfectly styled living room with its uncomfortable designer furniture, and headed straight for the hallway at the very back of the house. The door leading down to the basement was locked. It was not just locked, but heavily deadbolted from the outside. That specific detail alone made the blood freeze in Arthur's veins. Why would a standard mold remediation zone need to be locked from the outside? He grabbed the spare key Marcus had hidden in the utility drawer, a careless detail his son had mentioned months ago, and unlocked the deadbolt. The door swung open, revealing a steep flight of wooden stairs descending into the total dark. Arthur flipped the light switch on the wall, but absolutely nothing happened. The bolts had been deliberately removed. He gripped the heavy crowbar in his right hand and used his left hand to steady himself against the cold wall. He walked down the stairs, one agonizing step at a time. The air grew significantly colder and became thick with a stale, damp odor that made his stomach turn violently. At the bottom of the stairs, the finished section of the basement ended abruptly. Before him stood a heavy, reinforced utility door. This door did not belong in a residential suburban home. It looked like something salvaged from an industrial warehouse. And fastened across the center of it was a thick metal hasp secured by a heavy-duty padlock. Arthur stood completely still in the dim light filtering down from the top of the stairs. He held his breath and listened intently. A soft, muffled hiccup came from the other side of the solid steel. Then a tiny, trembling voice spoke barely above a whisper. Arthur did not think. He did not hesitate. The frail grandfather vanished and the fierce, relentless protector took over. He raised the heavy steel crowbar high above his head. His weak muscles screamed in protest and his old joints ached, but the adrenaline burned far hotter than the pain. He brought the crowbar crashing down violently onto the padlock. Metal screamed against metal. The impact sent a painful shockwave straight up his arms, jarring his teeth. He swung again. And again. He channeled every single ounce of strength he possessed and every bit of horror and rage building in his chest into that heavy piece of steel. On the fourth strike, the cheap internal mechanism of the heavy padlock shattered completely. Arthur dropped the crowbar, allowing it to clatter loudly onto the concrete floor. He pulled the broken padlock free while his chest heaved and his heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. With trembling, sweat-slicked hands, he grabbed the cold handle of the utility door and pulled it wide open, bracing his soul for the nightmare waiting in the dark. The heavy utility door groaned in protest as Arthur pulled it open, revealing a suffocating pocket of absolute darkness. The stench hit him immediately, a foul mixture of stale air, chemical fresheners, and the unmistakable odor of raw sewage. He reached blindly along the rough concrete wall until his trembling fingers brushed against a cheap plastic light switch. He flicked it upward. A single bare bulb flickered to life, swinging slightly from a frayed wire on the unfinished ceiling. The harsh yellow light illuminated a windowless storage space that looked far more like a prison cell than a room inside a luxury suburban home. Exposed pink fiberglass insulation bulged from the wooden studs like raw wounds. The floor was bare, freezing concrete. In the furthest corner, pressed tightly against the wall, was a small trembling shadow. Arthur felt his breath catch painfully in his throat. He took a slow step forward, his bad knee protesting the stiff movement, but his eyes never left the corner. There, curled on a thin, worn camping cot, was his grandson. Leo was only 6 years old, but he looked shockingly smaller. The boy was the spitting image of Marcus's late first wife, with his dark curly hair and large sensitive eyes. But those eyes were now wide with pure, absolute terror. His skin was translucent and pale, robbed of natural sunlight for what must have been weeks or perhaps months. He wore a faded gray shirt that hung loosely off his frail collarbones and a pair of sweatpants that were clearly too short for his growing legs. Surrounding the small cot was a scene that made Arthur's stomach violently churn. A yellow plastic bucket sat in the corner acting as a makeshift toilet. Scattered across the freezing concrete floor were dozens of empty metallic wrappers from diet protein bars, the exact kind Chloe constantly promoted on her social media channels as organic meal replacements. There were no toys. There were no picture books. There was absolutely nothing a growing 6-year-old boy needed to live or thrive. Arthur dropped heavily to his knees, ignoring the sharp, agonizing pain shooting up his legs. He made his frail body as small and unthreatening as possible. "Leo," Arthur whispered, his voice cracking with a heavy emotion he could barely contain. "It is Grandpa. It is Grandpa Arthur. I am right here." The little boy flinched violently at the sound, pressing his dirty hands tightly over his ears. He squeezed his eyes shut and began to rock back and forth on the thin mattress. "I am quiet," Leo chanted in a breathless, panicked whisper. "I am being so quiet. Please do not be mad. I am not ruining the aesthetic. I am a good secret." Those horrific words felt like physical blows landing squarely on Arthur's chest. He crawled closer, slowly extending a trembling, spotted hand. "You are not a secret, Leo. You are my beautiful grandson. Nobody is mad at you." Leo slowly opened his eyes, blinking against the harsh glare of the single bulb. He looked at Arthur's face, studying the familiar wrinkles and the thick framed glasses. A single tear carved a clean path down the boy's dirty cheek. "Chloe said my toys were too messy," Leo whispered, his voice hoarse and broken from disuse. "She said my messy habits ruined the brand. She told Daddy that I did not fit the minimalist vibe and her followers would hate me. Daddy said I had to stay down here and learn how to be invisible until they fixed me." The immense heartbreak that had been suffocating Arthur suddenly shattered into a million jagged pieces. In its place, a terrifying cold and absolute rage began to crystallize in his veins. The frail old man who let his arrogant son talk down to him, the gentle retiree who spent his quiet days organizing vintage stamps, evaporated entirely in that damp freezing room. 40 years of auditing corrupt corporate executives, of hunting down hidden offshore accounts and dismantling powerful lives built on lies had prepared him for this exact moment. His son and daughter-in-law had discarded a living, breathing human child like a piece of ugly furniture just to maintain a fake online image. They were going to pay. He was going to audit their entire existence until there was absolutely nothing left for them to hide behind. Arthur unbuttoned his thick woolen cardigan and slipped it off his weak shoulders. He gently wrapped the oversized sweater around Leo's trembling body, swallowing the boy in its thick, warm fabric. "You never have to be invisible again," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a low, steady register that lacked any trace of the weak old man he pretended to be. "Come here, Leo. We are leaving right now." Leo hesitated for a fraction of a second before throwing his thin, fragile arms around his grandfather's neck. He weighed almost nothing. Arthur scooped the 6-year-old boy into his arms. The physical strain on Arthur's back and his weakened heart was immense, but the cold, burning fury driving his soul provided all the strength he needed. He carried Leo up the steep wooden stairs, stepping out of the dark basement and back into the sterile white hallway of the mansion. Marta was waiting anxiously by the front door, her hands covering her mouth as silent tears streamed down her face. She took one look at the frail, pale child wrapped in the oversized cardigan and let out a muffled, heartbreaking sob. "Open the front door, Marta," Arthur commanded, his tone sharp, authoritative, and completely devoid of fear. "Go directly to your car and drive straight home. If anyone asks, you saw absolutely nothing today. I am handling this." Marta nodded, frantically wiping her wet face. She pulled the heavy oak door open and rushed out into the crisp autumn air. Arthur followed closely behind, holding Leo tightly against his chest, protecting him from the blinding afternoon sun. He did not look back at the perfect empty house. His mind was already moving 10 steps ahead, calculating the exact medical, legal, and financial procedures required to completely annihilate his son. The most important audit of Arthur Pendleton's life had officially begun. Arthur carefully laid Leo in the back seat of his old sedan, buckling the heavy seatbelt over the thick, oversized cardigan. The 6-year-old boy immediately curled into a tight defensive ball, pressing his knees against his chest and squeezing his eyes firmly shut against the bright afternoon sun. Arthur started the engine. His mind was already operating with the cold, calculating precision of a master ledger. A standard hospital emergency room was far too risky. The moment hospital staff laid eyes on a malnourished, terrified child, they would trigger automatic mandatory reporting protocols. Local police would immediately contact Marcus and Chloe at their luxury retreat in Sedona. That would give his arrogant son and manipulative daughter-in-law precious hours to hire expensive defense attorneys, spin a deceptive narrative, or fabricate a flawless cover story before Arthur had all the undeniable evidence securely locked down. Arthur needed irrefutable, ironclad proof gathered quietly and methodically. He drove deliberately through the quiet, tree-lined streets of Oak Park, heading toward the private practice of Dr. Samuel Vance. Samuel was an old trusted friend and a veteran pediatrician who had actually treated Marcus over 30 years ago. Samuel was a man who understood the critical importance of discretion and possessed a sharp clinical eye that missed absolutely nothing. Arthur parked his sedan in the secluded alley behind the brick clinic and carried the trembling boy inside through the private staff entrance. When Samuel saw Arthur carrying the fragile, pale child, his worn professional smile vanished in an instant, replaced by a look of sheer professional horror. The examination room was incredibly quiet. Samuel worked with agonizing slowness, murmuring gentle, warm reassurances as he meticulously assessed the physical damage. Leo flinched violently at the bright overhead lights and trembled at the touch of the cold stethoscope, but Arthur stood right beside the examination table, firmly holding the boy's small, dirty hand. Samuel's face grew progressively darker and more rigid with every new observation. The medical findings were a damning, terrifying inventory of systematic abuse. There was a severe caloric deficit resulting in prominent ribs, protruding collarbones, and alarming muscle atrophy. There was a dangerous vitamin D deficiency caused by a prolonged, complete deprivation of natural sunlight. The boy was heavily dehydrated. Worst of all, the delicate skin around Leo's wrists and ankles showed faint yellowish bruising, suggesting brief but repeated periods of physical restraint. Samuel documented every single horrifying detail, taking dozens of high-resolution photographs of the boy's physical condition under the harsh clinical lights. "Arthur," Samuel said, his voice thick with suppressed anger as he pulled off his latex gloves and tossed them into the medical waste bin. "This is not just accidental neglect. This is systematic, prolonged abuse. The boy is terrified of his own shadow. He flinched perfectly normal movements. I have to report this to State Child Protective Services immediately by law." "You will report it, Samuel," Arthur replied, his voice completely devoid of any warmth or hesitation. "But you will give me exactly 2 hours to file my legal motions first. I need your official medical report, signed, stamped, and dated right now. I need every photograph and every blood test result forwarded directly to my attorney. They are in Sedona right now, posting pictures of their luxury wellness retreat while this boy starved in a locked concrete room. If the state takes him blindly, they might put him in emergency foster care until the preliminary hearings. I will not let my grandson spend another single night surrounded by strangers." Samuel nodded grimly, fully understanding the gravity of the situation, and immediately went to his private office to print the necessary documents. Arthur pulled his cell phone from his pocket and dialed a secure number he had committed to memory 15 years ago. He called Eleanor Sterling, a ruthless, brilliant family law attorney whose extremely wealthy corporate clients Arthur used to audit. Eleanor was a legendary shark in a tailored suit, a woman who systematically dismantled arrogant, abusive men for a living. She answered on the second ring. Arthur wasted absolutely no time with pleasantries. He detailed the horrific discovery in the basement, the heavy locked utility door, the plastic bucket, and the immediate terrifying medical findings from Samuel. He explained the glaring financial disparity between Marcus's lavish public lifestyle and the absolute squalor his grandson was subjected to. The silence on the other end of the line was incredibly heavy and dangerous. "I am drafting an ex parte emergency kinship custody petition right this second," Eleanor said, her tone sharper than broken glass. "A judge will sign this emergency order before dinner time tonight. Marcus and that vapid influencer wife of his will have absolutely no legal right to even look at the boy by the time the sun goes down. Do you have the medical records secured?" "Samuel is printing the signed affidavits as we speak," Arthur confirmed while watching Leo through the open door. "I will fax them to your private office in exactly 10 minutes. I want an ironclad protective order, Eleanor. I want them legally barred from coming within 500 feet of my house or this child." "Consider it done, Arthur," Eleanor replied, her keyboard clacking furiously in the background. "Take the boy to your home. Keep him safe and warm. Let me build the legal cage to trap them." Arthur ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. He looked back at the examination table where a kind clinic nurse had just given Leo a thick heated blanket and a small plastic cup of warm apple juice. The 6-year-old boy held the cup with both hands, taking tiny hesitant sips as if he expected someone to suddenly snatch it away and punish him for being thirsty. The tragic sight fueled the icy furnace burning relentlessly in Arthur's chest. He had successfully secured the medical evidence, and the legal perimeter was rapidly being erected by the best attorney in the state. The physical safety of his grandson was guaranteed. Now it was time for the frail retired grandfather to move to the next critical phase of his grand audit. He needed to leave Leo resting safely and head back into the belly of the beast to follow the money. Arthur carried the sleeping 6-year-old boy into his own modest home. The small house was cluttered with towering stacks of classic novels, vintage stamp albums, and mismatched cozy furniture. It was the exact opposite of the sterile architectural nightmare Marcus and Chloe inhabited. It was warm and it was incredibly safe. Arthur laid Leo onto the plush guest bed, covering his frail, trembling frame with a heavy patchwork quilt. The boy let out a soft sigh and buried his pale face deep into the feather pillow, finally surrendering to the absolute exhaustion that gripped his fragile body. Arthur called his trusted next-door neighbor, a retired school teacher named Martha, to sit quietly in the living room and watch over the sleeping child. He did not explain the horrifying details, but Martha saw the grim, terrifying determination in Arthur's eyes and nodded silently, taking a seat by the wooden door. With Leo securely guarded, Arthur drove his old sedan back through the quiet streets of Oak Park. The afternoon sun was beginning to dip lower, casting long dark shadows across the manicured lawns. When he pulled into Marcus's wide driveway for the second time that day, the imposing glass and concrete mansion felt completely different. It was no longer just an offensive display of modern wealth. It was an active crime scene. Arthur unlocked the side door and stepped into the suffocating silence of the house. He ignored the shattered padlock resting on the cold concrete floor near the basement stairs. His mission now required a completely different set of tools. He walked straight past the pristine living room and entered Marcus's home office. The room was an immaculate shrine to corporate vanity. A massive glass desk dominated the space, holding a sleek silver desktop computer and precisely arranged expensive leather accessories. There were framed degrees on the wall and a pretentious abstract painting that probably cost more than Arthur earned in an entire year. Arthur sat down in the ergonomic leather chair. His bad knee throbbed with a dull, agonizing ache, but his mind was razor-sharp, operating with the ruthless clarity of a man who had spent 40 years dismantling financial liars. He tapped the keyboard and the large monitor instantly glowed to life, demanding a password. Marcus was an arrogant corporate finance director who believed he was the smartest man in any room, but Arthur knew his son was fundamentally lazy and deeply predictable. Marcus had always clung desperately to his past glory days. Arthur typed out the name of Marcus's high school football mascot, followed by the year he graduated and a number of his old jersey. The screen unlocked immediately, granting Arthur full, unhindered access to his son's digital life. The frail old man leaned forward, adjusting his thick-framed glasses. The grandfather who loved stamp collecting disappeared completely. The senior corporate auditor took his place. He pulled a small encrypted flash drive from his pocket and inserted it into the computer. His spotted hands flew across the keyboard with a practiced rhythmic speed that defied his 71 years of age. He bypassed the superficial family photo albums and the meticulously curated vacation itineraries. He dove straight into the hidden financial architecture of the household. Arthur opened the encrypted folders containing Marcus's personal banking records, the joint checking accounts, and the corporate filings for Chloe's wellness brand. Arthur meticulously pulled up the digital bank statements for the past 36 months. He opened the official tax returns Marcus had filed. He downloaded the limited liability company documents outlining the operational costs of Chloe's supposedly booming social media empire. As the files rapidly copied onto his secure drive, Arthur's experienced eyes scanned the columns of numbers. He did not need a calculator to spot the glaring, massive inconsistencies. The mathematics of their lives simply did not align with reality. Chloe boasted to her millions of followers about her highly profitable organic lifestyle brand, but the corporate tax returns painted a pathetic picture of a failing business bleeding thousands of dollars every single month. Yet despite the massive operational losses, they were somehow affording luxury car leases, exotic vacations to Sedona, and the exorbitant mortgage on a multi-million-dollar Oak Park mansion. People who lost that much money did not live like royalty unless they were stealing it from somewhere else. A panicked transfer here, a hidden account there. The numbers always told the truth. Arthur watched the progress bar on his computer screen slowly fill as he copied every single agonizing detail of their financial existence. He was digging deep into the digital bedrock of their lives, searching for the exact source of their stolen wealth. He knew the money was coming from somewhere dark, and he was absolutely determined to drag every single dirty decimal into the blinding light of a federal courtroom. The drive back to his own home was cloaked in the heavy darkness of early evening. Arthur held the small encrypted flash drive in his palm, feeling its cold metallic edges pressing into his skin. It felt infinitely heavier than the steel crowbar he had wielded earlier that afternoon. This tiny device contained the digital weapon he would use to completely obliterate his son. When Arthur walked through his front door, the warm scent of old books and chamomile tea greeted him. Martha, his trusted neighbor, stood up from the worn floral armchair. She spoke in a hushed whisper, confirming that the 6-year-old boy had not stirred once. Arthur expressed his deep gratitude and locked the deadbolt behind her as she left. He walked quietly down the narrow hallway and peeked into the guest bedroom. Leo was breathing in a slow, rhythmic pattern, his pale face illuminated softly by the small amber nightlight Arthur had plugged into the wall. The boy looked so fragile and broken. Arthur felt the familiar icy rage harden his spine. He retreated to his study. The room was lined with towering bookshelves and centered around a massive antique oak desk. He brewed a pot of strong black coffee, pouring it into a chipped ceramic mug. He sat down heavily in his leather chair and inserted the flash drive into his own computer. The screen illuminated Arthur's deeply lined face. He opened a fresh blank spreadsheet. For a senior corporate auditor, a blank spreadsheet was a canvas, and Arthur was a master artist preparing to paint a masterpiece of absolute destruction. He began opening the stolen files, arranging Marcus's bank statements on one side of his monitor and Chloe's business ledgers on the other. He spent the first 3 hours meticulously cross-referencing their monthly expenditures against their legitimate income. Marcus earned a very handsome salary as a corporate finance director, pulling in roughly $200,000 a year. But their lifestyle demanded easily triple that amount. Chloe's wellness brand was an absolute financial black hole. She spent tens of thousands of dollars on fake followers, organic marketing campaigns, and aesthetic photo shoots, but her actual retail sales were practically non-existent. The mortgage on the Oak Park mansion alone consumed $15,000 every single month. Then there were the luxury vehicle leases, the private country club memberships, the designer clothes, and the constant exotic vacations. Arthur tracked the massive deficit month by month. The math was impossible. They were bleeding cash at a staggering rate, yet they never missed a single payment. There had to be a hidden reservoir. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, his sharp eyes caught a subtle recurring anomaly. Every time the joint checking account approached zero, a substantial wire transfer would miraculously appear to cover the overdrawn balance. The incoming funds were vaguely labeled as external portfolio dividends. But Arthur knew Marcus did not have the intelligence or the discipline to build an investment portfolio capable of yielding that kind of liquid cash. Arthur dug into the routing numbers attached to those transfers. His fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing superficial banking layers until he unearthed the origin account. It was an irrevocable trust fund. He opened the original establishment documents and his heart completely stopped beating in his chest. The trust had been created exactly 4 years ago, just weeks after Marcus's first wife died tragically in a violent car collision. The initial deposit was a life insurance payout totaling exactly $750,000. Arthur read the legal charter line by agonizing line. The money was strictly designated for the sole benefit of Leo Pendleton. It was legally bound to be used exclusively for the boy's healthcare, education, and overall welfare until his 21st birthday. Marcus was named as the primary executor, solely entrusted to manage the funds on his son's behalf. A sickening wave of pure absolute disgust washed over the old man. Arthur began mapping the withdrawals. He matched the dates and the exact dollar amounts from the trust fund to the deposits in Chloe's business accounts. When Chloe needed to lease her pristine white Porsche SUV, Marcus had authorized a direct wire transfer of $12,000 from his son's inheritance. When the bank threatened to foreclose on the massive architectural monstrosity they called a home, Marcus had drained $50,000 to bring the mortgage current. Just 2 weeks ago, Marcus had withdrawn $15,000 to completely fund the luxury couple's wellness retreat in Sedona. They were not just hiding Leo because his toys ruined their minimalist aesthetic. That was merely the cruel excuse they used to justify their monstrous behavior. They had locked the boy in a freezing concrete basement and starved him into absolute silence so they could systematically steal his dead mother's money without anyone asking questions. They were literally feeding their glamorous social media empire with the very funds meant to protect and nurture a grieving child. Arthur did not cry. He had shed his final tears in that dark basement. He simply highlighted the fraudulent transactions in bright, stark red. He created complex pivot tables that mapped the exact flow of the stolen money, proving without a shadow of a doubt that Marcus was committing felony wire fraud and massive embezzlement. He cross-referenced the dates of the largest withdrawals with Chloe's boastful Instagram posts, building an undeniable chronological timeline of their staggering greed. By the time the first faint rays of dawn began to creep through the study window, Arthur had built an impenetrable fortress of financial evidence. The master spreadsheet contained over 400 rows of meticulously documented felonies. He saved the file and backed it up to 3 separate secure locations. The financial trap was fully constructed, loaded, and ready to be sprung. The arrogant thieves in Sedona had absolutely no idea that their entire world had just been completely dismantled by the frail old man they loved to bully. The morning sun broke through the heavy curtains of Arthur Pendleton's study, casting a warm golden glow over the scattered stacks of paper on his antique oak desk. He closed his laptop and rubbed his tired eyes. He had not slept a single minute, but a profound sense of purpose had completely replaced his physical exhaustion. He stood up from his leather chair and walked quietly down the hall toward the guest bedroom. Leo was already awake. The 6-year-old boy was sitting up in the center of the large bed, clutching the thick patchwork quilt tightly against his small chest. His large dark eyes darted nervously around the cluttered cozy room, half expecting someone to burst through the door and punish him for breathing too loudly. Arthur offered a gentle, reassuring smile. "Good morning, Leo. Are you hungry?" The boy gave a tiny, hesitant nod. He opened his mouth to speak, but quickly clamped it shut, casting his gaze downward. "It is okay to talk here," Arthur said softly, taking a step into the room. "It is okay to be loud. You can shout if you want to. This is your house now." Leo looked up, his lower lip trembling slightly. "Chloe says loud boys get locked away. I did not want to go back to the dark." Arthur felt a fresh wave of quiet fury ripple through his chest, but he kept his voice incredibly warm and steady. "You are never going back there. I promise you that. Now let us go to the kitchen and make the loudest breakfast we possibly can." He led the fragile boy into the heart of his home. Arthur's kitchen was small and filled with mismatched ceramic bowls, copper pots hanging from the ceiling, and a delightfully noisy ancient refrigerator. It was a space designed for living, not for taking pristine social media photographs. Arthur pulled out a heavy cast iron skillet and placed it onto the gas stove. He handed Leo a large wooden spoon and a stainless steel mixing bowl. "I need you to beat these eggs," Arthur instructed, placing a carton on the counter. "And I want you to make a terrible racket while you do it." Leo took the spoon with trembling hands. He tapped it lightly against the metal bowl, producing a timid ping. Arthur chuckled and grabbed his own metal spatula, banging it loudly against the cast iron skillet. The harsh metallic clang made Leo jump, but when he saw his grandfather smiling, the boy tentatively struck his bowl a little harder. Within 10 minutes, the small kitchen was filled with the chaotic, wonderful sounds of sizzling bacon, clattering silverware, and the glorious noise of a child finally allowed to exist. Arthur served a massive plate of fluffy scrambled eggs, crispy bacon, and buttered toast. He watched with a heavy heart as Leo devoured the food with a desperate, ravenous intensity. The boy had survived on dry protein bars for months. Seeing him eat a proper warm meal was a victory sweeter than any financial audit Arthur had ever conducted. After breakfast, Arthur cleared the kitchen table and brought out a large wooden box filled with thick, colorful crayons and stacks of blank white printer paper. He pulled up a chair next to his grandson and began drawing a terribly disproportionate dog. Leo watched for a moment before picking up a bright blue crayon. "Can I draw a house?" Leo asked in a tiny whisper. "You can draw 100 houses," Arthur replied, sliding more paper toward him. "And you can color outside the lines all you want. Messy drawings are the very best kind." They spent the entire afternoon sitting side by side in the warm sunlight filtering through the kitchen window. Leo drew houses with crooked chimneys and giant blue trees. He dropped crayons on the floor and accidentally smudged colors across the wooden table, but Arthur never scolded him once. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the suffocating blanket of terror began to lift from the boy's fragile shoulders. He was finally safe. When evening arrived, Arthur gave Leo a warm bath and tucked him back into the guest bed. He read 3 chapters of an old adventure novel until the boy's breathing slowed into a deep, peaceful rhythm. Once Leo was completely asleep, Arthur returned to his study. The grandfather faded away and the ruthless corporate auditor took command once again. He turned on his heavy laser printer and loaded a fresh ream of paper. It was time to build the guillotine. Arthur printed the massive 400-row spreadsheet he had created the night before. He printed the damning medical report Dr. Samuel Vance had securely emailed him, highlighting the severe malnutrition and the horrifying physical signs of physical restraint. He printed the official ex parte emergency kinship custody order that Eleanor Sterling had ruthlessly pushed through the family court judge just a few hours ago. He arranged 3 thick, heavy-duty binders on his desk. He was a man who believed in the absolute power of meticulous documentation. The first binder was designated for the local family court, containing all the evidence required to permanently strip Marcus and Chloe of their parental rights. The second binder was addressed directly to the criminal division of the district attorney, outlining the severe child endangerment and the felony wire fraud. The third binder was Arthur's ultimate masterpiece. He addressed it to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. He included every single fraudulent tax return Marcus had filed and the fabricated business ledgers Chloe used to mask their massive embezzlement. He knew the IRS pursued tax evasion with a terrifying, relentless aggression that would completely obliterate any remaining shreds of their wealthy lifestyle. Arthur snapped the final binders shut and ran his spotted hand over the smooth black cover. He had secured the safe haven for his grandson. The legal traps were perfectly set. The financial evidence was entirely irrefutable. Now all he had to do was wait for the arrogant thieves to return from their luxury vacation and walk blindly into their own absolute destruction. It took exactly 48 hours for the legal explosive to detonate in the middle of the Arizona desert. Arthur Pendleton knew the precise moment the local sheriff deputies marched into the luxury wellness retreat in Sedona and handed his son the thick stack of emergency court documents. He knew because his cell phone immediately began vibrating with an endless barrage of furious text messages and missed calls from Marcus. Arthur did not answer a single one of them. He simply turned his phone on silent, placed it in his desk drawer, and went back to teaching his 6-year-old grandson how to properly water the hydrangeas in the backyard garden. The inevitable confrontation arrived on a crisp Thursday afternoon. A black luxury rental SUV screeched violently into Arthur's narrow driveway, its heavy tires crushing the edges of his perfectly manicured lawn. The vehicle had barely come to a complete stop before the heavy doors flew open. Arthur was already waiting. He had instructed his trusted neighbor Martha to take Leo into the deep backyard and keep him occupied with a new wooden train set far away from the front of the house. Arthur walked slowly into his small entryway. He pulled a high-backed floral armchair directly into the foyer facing the front door. He sat down, carefully resting his bad knee, and picked up a delicate porcelain cup filled with hot chamomile tea. He opened the heavy solid oak front door completely wide but left the reinforced steel mesh security screen securely locked tight. Heavy, aggressive footsteps stomped up the wooden porch stairs. Marcus appeared on the other side of the screen door, his face flushed an ugly dark crimson with pure, unadulterated rage. He was still wearing his expensive earth-toned linen resort wear, looking completely ridiculous and disheveled. Chloe flanked in closely. Her oversized designer sunglasses were pushed up into her perfectly styled hair, and she was already holding her large smartphone high in the air with the camera lens pointed directly at the frail old man sitting in the armchair. "Open this door right now, you senile old fool," Marcus roared, his voice echoing loudly down the quiet suburban street. He grabbed the handle of the locked security screen and rattled it violently. The heavy metal did not budge. "What the hell do you think you are doing, Arthur? How dare you send police to our resort and humiliate us in front of our peers? You are going to hand Leo over to us right this second, or I swear to God I will have you arrested for felony kidnapping." Arthur did not flinch. He did not raise his voice. He sat perfectly still in his armchair, holding his teacup with two spotted hands. He took a very slow, deliberate sip of the hot chamomile. The delicate clink of the porcelain cup settling back onto its saucer was the only sound he made. "You are trespassing, Marcus," Arthur said, his voice barely above a quiet, steady whisper. Because he spoke so softly, his son was forced to stop screaming just to hear the words. The family court judge signed the ex parte emergency kinship custody order 2 days ago. "You have absolutely no legal right to step foot on my property. You have absolutely no legal right to see the boy." Marcus slammed his open palms against the steel mesh. He was a large man used to intimidating his subordinates in corporate boardrooms, and he had spent his entire adult life believing his father was a weak, submissive pushover. He leaned his face close to the screen, baring his teeth. "You have lost your absolute mind," Marcus spat venomously. "You broke into my private home and stole my child. You fabricated lies to a judge because you are a lonely, pathetic old man who wants to control my family. I am his father. You are nothing but a retired pencil pusher. Open the damn door before I kick it off its hinges." Behind him, Chloe stepped closer to the screen, pushing her glowing phone forward. She had seamlessly slipped into her curated influencer persona, adopting a perfectly measured tone of devastated victimhood for her digital audience. "Look at him, guys," Chloe said into her camera, her voice trembling with expertly faked emotion. "This is the reality of dealing with toxic, manipulative family members. We were at a healing sanctuary trying to process our generational trauma, and my abusive father-in-law literally broke into our safe space and abducted our child. He is holding my stepson hostage because he refuses to respect our boundaries and our parenting choices. Please share this video so everyone can see what a monster he is." Arthur looked at Chloe through the steel mesh. He looked at the glowing camera lens, and then he looked deeply into the panicked, furious eyes of his own son. He saw the sheer desperate arrogance of two monsters who genuinely believed their own fabricated reality. They had locked a starving 6-year-old boy in a freezing concrete basement surrounded by plastic buckets and diet protein wrappers, yet they had the absolute audacity to stand on a porch and preach about healing generational trauma. The sheer absurdity of their arrogance solidified the cold, calculated ice running through Arthur's veins. He set his teacup down on the small wooden side table next to his armchair. He leaned forward, resting his frail hands on the head of his wooden walking cane. "You may record me all you like, Chloe," Arthur said, staring dead into the camera lens with hollow, chilling eyes. "I highly encourage you to document this exact moment. Because when the local news stations acquire the photographs of that locked utility room and the medical reports detailing severe malnutrition, your millions of followers are going to watch this video, and they are going to tear your entire life into tiny little shreds." Chloe's fake trembling voice faltered instantly. The smartphone in her hand dipped slightly as a flash of genuine terror crossed her pristine face. Marcus noticed the sudden shift and slammed his fist against the doorframe. "Shut up, Arthur. Stop playing your stupid little mind games. You do not know anything about how the real world works. My lawyers are going to bury you so deep in civil lawsuits you will spend the rest of your pathetic life living in a cardboard box. Hand him over now and I might consider not sending you to prison." Arthur slowly leaned back into his floral armchair. The physical intimidation tactics, the loud screaming, and the empty legal threats were entirely useless against a man who had already secured all the winning cards. Arthur knew Marcus was completely terrified beneath his aggressive bluster. They had returned to Oak Park expecting to easily bully a frail old grandfather into submission and force the horrific secret back into the dark basement. They had vastly underestimated the senior corporate auditor sitting in front of them. "Your high-priced lawyers are going to be incredibly busy, Marcus," Arthur stated calmly, folding his hands peacefully in his lap. "But they will not be suing me. They will be desperately trying to keep you out of a federal penitentiary. Now get off my porch before I dial emergency services and have you both removed in handcuffs." Arthur picked up his teacup and took another slow, quiet sip. He did not break eye contact. He sat there radiating an immovable, terrifying authority while his arrogant son stared back, finally beginning to realize that the old man he had mocked for decades had just masterfully locked the heavy steel doors of a trap they could never escape. Arthur watched the vein bulge in his son's forehead. Marcus was still breathing heavily, gripping the metal mesh of the security door. Arthur slowly reached into the deep pocket of his thick cardigan. He pulled out a single sheet of crisp white printer paper. It was not the massive 400-row spreadsheet. It was an executive summary, a perfectly condensed ledger of pure financial ruin. Arthur leaned forward and slid the paper through the narrow gap at the bottom of the security screen. Marcus snatched it from the porch floor with an aggressive sneer. He expected a list of insane demands or perhaps a rambling handwritten letter about family morals. He aggressively unfolded the paper. Arthur watched the exact second his son's arrogant reality shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The single sheet detailed 4 specific wire transfers from Leo's irrevocable life insurance trust directly into Chloe's failing business accounts. It listed the exact routing numbers, the precise calendar dates, and the corresponding fraudulent purchases: a $12,000 down payment for a luxury white vehicle and a $15,000 charge for an upscale Arizona wellness retreat. At the very bottom of the page, Arthur had printed the specific federal statute codes for wire fraud and the embezzlement of a minor's estate. The dark crimson flush of anger completely drained from Marcus's face, leaving him a sickening shade of pale gray. His large hands began to shake so violently the paper rattled loudly in his grip. The loud corporate bully evaporated instantly, leaving behind a terrified thief who suddenly realized he was standing squarely on the gallows with the rope already tightened around his neck. "What is it, babe?" Chloe demanded, lowering her smartphone and trying to peer over his shaking shoulder. "What did that crazy old man give you?" "Shut your mouth, Chloe," Marcus hissed, his voice entirely stripped of its former booming volume. He crumpled the paper into a tight ball and shoved it deep into his linen pocket. He looked at his father through the steel mesh. There was absolutely no rage left in his eyes, only pure, unadulterated panic. He grabbed his wife by the upper arm, ignoring her shocked protests, and practically dragged her down the wooden porch steps toward their rented luxury vehicle. They sped away, leaving deep black tire marks on the quiet suburban street. Over the next 14 days, the desperate scramble of 2 cornered animals played out exactly as Arthur had meticulously predicted. He remained quietly barricaded inside his cozy home, focusing entirely on helping Leo heal. They built towering block castles in the living room and planted a small vegetable garden in the backyard, giving the boy fresh air and safe sunshine. Meanwhile, the pristine world Marcus and Chloe had built began to violently collapse around them. Chloe attempted to control the rapidly deteriorating narrative online. She aggressively edited the video she had recorded on Arthur's porch, cutting out Marcus's screaming and leaving only her own fake trembling voice. She posted the highly manipulated clip to her millions of followers, claiming she was the devastated victim of a malicious family misunderstanding orchestrated by a toxic grandfather. She paired the video with a lengthy caption about generational trauma and the agonizing pain of a blended family being torn apart by a jealous relative. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. The internet was a vast and incredibly hungry machine. Within 48 hours, digital sleuths began picking her fabricated story apart. A neighbor from their Oak Park subdivision anonymously posted on a local community forum about seeing multiple police cruisers and a child protective services van parked at the massive mansion. Another anonymous user found the public court docket showing a pending ex parte emergency kinship custody hearing involving the local authorities. The dark, horrifying whisper of a locked basement began to circulate through her comment sections like absolute wildfire. Chloe's meticulously curated social media presence transformed into a brutal digital war zone. Major organic food sponsors and luxury wellness brands began quietly severing their lucrative partnership contracts to avoid the rapidly swelling public relations disaster. She posted 2 more frantic videos attempting to clarify the situation, but her subscriber count was already plummeting by the tens of thousands every single day. Marcus was fighting his own invisible war. His corporate employer placed him on immediate unpaid administrative leave the very moment the pending criminal investigation flagged their internal human resources department. Desperate and bleeding cash, Marcus hired a prominent aggressive defense attorney known for making high-profile wealthy scandals quietly disappear. The sleek defense attorney called Arthur's home phone on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. The lawyer spoke with a smooth, calculated charm, attempting to downplay the horrific abuse as a regrettable lapse in parental judgment caused by extreme executive burnout and modern stress. "Mr. Pendleton," the defense attorney crooned over the telephone line. "My clients are prepared to offer a very generous financial settlement. We can establish a new independent educational trust for the boy funded completely out of their own pockets. We can make all these unfortunate accounting errors and this messy family dispute go away quietly without subjecting anyone to the traumatic circus of a public trial. You want what is best for your grandson, do you not?" Arthur sat at his antique oak desk watching Leo color a vibrant picture of a bright yellow sun on the living room rock. The frail old man's voice was absolute ice. "You misunderstand my position, counselor," Arthur replied, his tone slicing through the attorney's slick charm like a surgical scalpel. "I am not negotiating a corporate merger. I am auditing an active crime scene. Your client locked a starving 6-year-old boy in a freezing concrete basement so he could systematically steal a dead woman's money. You tell my son that I do not negotiate with child abusers. You tell him I am going to salt the earth where his house currently stands." Arthur placed the receiver gently back onto the cradle, severing the connection entirely. He did not feel a single ounce of pity. The pre-trial desperation was merely the pathetic opening act. The real devastation would begin when they finally stepped inside a federal courtroom and realized the frail old grandfather held every single key to their permanent destruction. The heavy wooden doors of the family courthouse in downtown Chicago felt like the gates of absolute reckoning. Arthur Pendleton walked through the metal detectors with a slow, deliberate limp, leaning heavily on his wooden cane. Beside him walked Eleanor Sterling, looking like an apex predator dressed in a pristine gray suit. She carried the thick black binders that contained the undeniable ruin of Marcus Pendleton. Arthur felt the familiar ache in his bad knee, but his mind was completely focused, operating with the lethal calm of a man who had already won a war and was simply arriving to collect the casualties. They entered the designated courtroom on the 3rd floor. Marcus and Chloe were already seated tightly at the defense table. Chloe had completely abandoned her glamorous online aesthetic. She wore a plain beige cardigan, her hair tied back loosely, and zero makeup. She had clearly been instructed by her high-priced attorney to look like an exhausted, relatable mother who was merely the victim of a terrible familial misunderstanding. Marcus wore a dark tailored suit, but his silk tie was pulled slightly loose, and the deep dark circles under his eyes betrayed the sheer consuming terror he had been living in for the past 2 weeks. The family court judge, a stern older woman named Judge Helen Carter, called the emergency custody hearing to order. The defense attorney immediately attempted to seize control of the narrative. He called Chloe to the witness stand first. Chloe gripped the edges of the wooden witness box and let loose an absolute masterclass in fabricated grief. She produced genuine tears as she spoke softly about the profound stresses of modern blended families. She claimed the basement was simply undergoing temporary renovations to create a beautiful sensory playroom and that Leo loved playing down there to escape the loud noises of the upper floors. She wept openly, painting Arthur as a vindictive, jealous grandfather who was suffering from early cognitive decline and simply did not understand their holistic parenting boundaries. She begged the judge to return her beloved stepson so they could continue their journey of generational healing. Judge Carter listened with an impassive, unreadable stone face. When the defense finally concluded their emotional performance, Eleanor Sterling stood up. She did not raise her voice or display any theatrical outrage. She simply called Arthur Pendleton to the stand. Arthur walked slowly to the wooden box. He looked incredibly frail, his thick glasses magnifying his tired, aged eyes. His hands trembled slightly as he rested them on the wooden railing. But when he swore to tell the absolute truth, his voice rang out through the silent courtroom with a cold, unwavering clarity. Eleanor began methodically laying out the horrifying reality. She did not ask Arthur about his feelings or his familial heartbreak. She asked him about the cold, hard facts. Arthur described the heavy industrial utility door and the thick, shattered padlock. He described the freezing concrete floor, the yellow plastic bucket used as a toilet, and the dozens of diet protein wrappers scattered in the dark. He kept his emotions entirely locked away behind a wall of pure iron, delivering every single damning detail with the surgical precision of a senior corporate auditor. Eleanor then submitted Dr. Samuel Vance's comprehensive medical evaluation directly into the official court record. She read the horrifying clinical details aloud for the entire room to hear. Severe caloric deficit resulting in prominent muscle atrophy. Dangerous vitamin D deficiency caused by prolonged total deprivation of sunlight. Faint yellowish bruising around the delicate skin of the wrists and ankles indicating physical restraint. Chloe let out a loud, dramatic gasp, covering her mouth in feigned shock, claiming she had absolutely no idea the boy was physically unwell. Judge Carter silenced her instantly with a single lethal glare that promised severe consequences if she interrupted the proceedings again. Next, Eleanor submitted the sworn affidavit from Marta, the cleaning lady, detailing the muffled crying and the locked door. She followed it immediately with signed, notarized statements from 3 separate neighbors residing in the Oak Park subdivision. All 3 neighbors explicitly confirmed under penalty of perjury that they had not seen the 6-year-old boy playing outside the house or even looking through a window in over 8 entire months. The sheer volume of undeniable documented evidence began to suffocate the courtroom. The air grew incredibly heavy. Marcus stared blankly at the polished wooden table, his corporate arrogance completely shattered into dust. The sleek defense attorney desperately attempted to object, citing hearsay and demanding an independent medical review, but Judge Carter slammed her wooden gavel down with a deafening, violent crack. The judge leaned forward, peering over her reading glasses directly at Marcus and Chloe. Her expression was one of pure, absolute disgust. She stated clearly for the official record that in her 20 years sitting on the family court bench, she had rarely seen such a calculated, monstrous display of child neglect disguised as modern progressive parenting. She noted that locking a starving child in a windowless concrete room was not a holistic boundary but an act of profound evil. Judge Carter did not even need to recess to deliberate. She ruled immediately from the bench. She permanently stripped Marcus and Chloe of all physical and legal custody rights regarding the 6-year-old boy. She granted permanent full guardianship directly to Arthur Pendleton. Furthermore, she issued a permanent restraining order legally barring both Marcus and Chloe from coming within 1,000 feet of Arthur or the child ever again. Chloe collapsed into her chair sobbing hysterically, but this time the tears were absolutely genuine. Marcus buried his face in his hands, his broad shoulders shaking with the terrifying realization that he had just lost his son forever. But Arthur sat perfectly still in the witness box. He felt a deep, profound wave of relief wash over his tired soul, knowing Leo was finally permanently safe. However, the frail old auditor knew the reckoning was only half finished. They had lost their child, but they still had their stolen wealth and their unearned freedom. Arthur looked over at Eleanor Sterling, who gave him a very small, imperceptible nod. It was finally time to drop the financial bomb and salt the earth. Judge Helen Carter reached for her heavy wooden gavel, prepared to formally adjourn the emergency custody hearing. The heavy air in the courtroom was thick with the suffocating reality of the ruling. Marcus sat frozen, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a cheap theatrical costume, while Chloe continued to sob hysterically into her hands. But before the heavy wooden mallet could strike the sounding block, Eleanor Sterling cleared her throat and remained standing at the plaintiff table. "Your Honor," Eleanor said, her voice slicing through the residual noise of Chloe's weeping. "Before this court adjourns, there is one final critical matter regarding the minor child's legal estate that requires your immediate judicial intervention." Judge Carter paused, her gavel suspended in midair. "Proceed, counselor." Eleanor opened the thickest black binder resting on her table. She pulled out the 400-row spreadsheet that Arthur Pendleton had meticulously constructed during that long, sleepless night in his study. She approached the bench and handed the massive, terrifying document directly to the judge. She then provided a duplicate copy to the slick defense attorney, who took it with a deeply suspicious frown. "What you are looking at, Your Honor, is a comprehensive forensic audit of the child's irrevocable life insurance trust," Eleanor explained, her tone devoid of any theatricality but heavy with absolute devastation. "The trust was established 4 years ago with a principal balance of $750,000 strictly designated for the healthcare, education, and general welfare of Leo Pendleton. The boy's father, Marcus Pendleton, was named the sole executing trustee." Marcus's head snapped up violently. The deep, dark circles under his eyes seemed to hollow out entirely. The look of pure, unadulterated panic that had vanished momentarily under his grief now returned with a blinding, terrifying intensity. He looked frantically at his defense attorney, who was rapidly scanning the spreadsheet, his face draining of all color. "If you direct your attention to page 4, Your Honor," Eleanor continued, pacing slowly in front of the witness stand where Arthur still sat perfectly still. "You will see a heavily documented chronological timeline. Arthur Pendleton, who spent 40 years as a senior corporate auditor, cross-referenced the trust withdrawals with the defendant's personal banking statements and corporate ledgers. The math is completely undeniable." Judge Carter put her reading glasses back on and lowered her eyes to the thick stack of paper. The courtroom fell into an agonizing, suffocating silence, broken only by the sharp rustle of the judge turning the pages. "On the 2nd of March, Eleanor stated, pointing to her own copy, Marcus Pendleton authorized a direct wire transfer of $12,000 from his son's trust to a luxury automotive dealership to secure a lease on a white Porsche SUV driven exclusively by his wife. On the 14th of August, he drained $50,000 from the minor's estate to prevent foreclosure on their Oak Park mansion. And just 3 weeks ago, while the 6-year-old boy was locked in a freezing concrete basement subsisting entirely on diet protein bars, Marcus Pendleton withdrew $15,000 to completely fund the luxury couple's wellness retreat in Sedona, Arizona." Judge Carter stopped turning the pages. She slowly lifted her head and stared directly at Marcus. The temperature in the courtroom seemed to drop 50 degrees. The look of profound judicial disgust had evolved into a look of pure lethal fury. "Is this accurate?" Judge Carter asked, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying the terrifying weight of absolute authority. "Did you systematically drain your starving son's inheritance to fund your luxury lifestyle?" "Objection, Your Honor. the defense attorney stammered, leaping to his feet. My client cannot be compelled to testify regarding unverified financial allegations in a family court proceeding. Sit down, counselor, Judge Carter barked, her voice echoing like a gunshot. These are official bank routing numbers and time-stamped wire transfers. This is not a mere allegation. This is a masterfully documented financial slaughter. The sheer crushing weight of the trap finally broke Marcus. The arrogant corporate director completely fractured under the blinding fluorescent lights of the courtroom. He spun around and pointed a trembling, accusing finger directly at his wife. It was her, Marcus screamed, his voice cracking with desperate, pathetic terror. Chloe's business was failing. She was losing tens of thousands of dollars every single month. She told me we had to maintain the brand image or we would lose everything. She is the one who wanted the car. She is the one who booked the retreat. She made me take the money. Chloe dropped her hands from her face, her tear-streaked cheeks suddenly burning with a vicious, ugly rage. The curated influencer persona completely evaporated, leaving behind a vicious, cornered animal. You lying coward, Chloe shrieked violently, shoving her chair backward. You told me the trust money was your annual corporate bonus. You told me the boy was legally yours to manage. You handled all the finances. You were the one who bought the heavy padlock for the basement door because you said his crying was giving you a migraine. Do not you dare put this on me. You said his toys ruined your aesthetic, Marcus roared back, slamming his fists on the defense table. You said your followers would leave if they saw a messy, broken kid. The brutal, ugly truth spilled out into the open air, stating the polished wood of the courtroom. They tore into each other like starving wolves, completely dismantling their pristine public image and offering the court a front-row seat to their profound, monstrous greed. Arthur sat quietly in the witness box, watching his son absolutely destroy himself. The frail old grandfather felt no joy, only a cold, sterile satisfaction that the audit was finally perfectly complete. Judge Carter slammed her gavel down repeatedly until the violent shouting match finally ceased. Both Marcus and Chloe stood chest-heaving, staring at each other with pure, absolute hatred. I have heard absolutely enough, Judge Carter declared, her voice trembling with righteous fury. I am officially freezing all personal and corporate assets belonging to Marcus and Chloe Pendleton effective immediately. Furthermore, I am transmitting this entire forensic dossier directly to the criminal division of the district attorney. I am formally recommending immediate criminal prosecution for felony embezzlement, wire fraud, and severe child endangerment. The judge leveled a final devastating glare at the two shattered defendants. You treated a vulnerable, grieving child like a bank account and a burden. You will both find that the federal penitentiary system cares absolutely nothing about your brand aesthetic. This hearing is adjourned. The heavy gavel fell with a final deafening crack, sealing their absolute ruin. 6 months passed since the heavy wooden gavel fell in the family courtroom. The absolute ruin Arthur Pendleton had meticulously engineered finally reached its undeniable conclusion. Faced with the mountain of irrefutable financial evidence and the horrifying medical reports, Marcus and Chloe had absolutely no room to negotiate. They officially accepted formal plea deals to avoid a lengthy public trial that would have exposed the deepest depths of their cruelty to the entire world. Marcus pleaded guilty to felony wire fraud, embezzlement, and severe child endangerment. He was sentenced to 7 consecutive years in a federal penitentiary. Chloe, facing identical charges and the complete obliteration of her social media empire, received a 5-year prison sentence. The massive architectural monstrosity in Oak Park was swiftly foreclosed upon and sold at public auction. Every single dollar of equity stripped from the sterile mansion, along with the immediate liquidation of their luxury vehicles, was legally routed directly back into the irrevocable life insurance trust, ensuring that Leo would have his mother's financial legacy completely restored. Back at the modest, cluttered home of Arthur Pendleton, life had bloomed into something incredibly beautiful and wonderfully loud. The frail 71-year-old man stood on his back porch holding a warm cup of chamomile tea. His spotted hand still trembled slightly, but his heart was incredibly full. He watched his 6-year-old grandson run across the green grass chasing a bright red plastic ball. Leo was no longer the pale, terrified shadow locked in a freezing concrete basement. He had gained healthy weight, his cheeks were flushed with vibrant color, and most importantly, he was delightfully loud. He laughed freely, his joyful voice echoing across the suburban backyard. Arthur took a slow, quiet sip of his tea, knowing that his sharp instincts and his relentless corporate audit had permanently secured the boy's absolute freedom. The numbers had told the horrifying truth, but the love of a devoted grandfather had provided the ultimate salvation. This story leaves us with a profound and incredibly important life lesson. True family is not defined by perfectly curated photographs on the internet or the vast amount of material wealth one possesses. True family is about unwavering protection, unconditional love, and having the ultimate courage to stand up against unimaginable cruelty, even when it means confronting your own flesh and blood. It powerfully reminds us that the darkest secrets often hide behind the most glamorous, pristine facades, but the illuminating light of justice and the fierce protective instinct of a loved one can break through the heaviest steel locks. If you found this story compelling and deeply emotional, please take a moment to hit the like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on the captivating and dramatic stories we bring to you every single day. We would truly love to hear your thoughts. How did this narrative make you feel? Have you ever witnessed a situation in your own life where public appearances were completely deceiving? Please share your deepest feelings and personal reflections in the comments section below, because we genuinely want to listen to the genuine emotions coming straight from your heart. Before we go, we want to send our absolute warmest wishes to everyone watching this video right now. We sincerely hope you are blessed with excellent health, abundant joy, and profound peace every single day of your beautiful lives. Goodbye for now, and we look forward to seeing you again in the next video.